What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. This is Operation Smarty Pants, where our mission is to acquire knowledge and expand our minds. I am your humble host, Special Agent Ray, and today we are going to uncover the secrets of Gobekli Tepe, the oldest known man-made structure in the world. I'm super excited about this one, you guys. As always, thank you for the love on the last episode. Stick around to the end of this one for some shout outs, some shout outs and some responses to that. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So this week I watched episode 5 of the series Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. Now, this series is hosted by a man named Graham Hancock. He has spent decades researching and writing about ancient civilizations, mysteries of the past, and even from their proposed alternative options to what has happened in our history. So his work often challenges conventional theories, and he explores the possibility of a lost advanced civilization that predates known history. He does all of this by using information and studies and experts from different fields like archaeology, anthropology, geology, and astronomy to try and piece together a more comprehensive understanding of human history. So he's taking all of this information about things like what we're going to look at today, Gobekli Tepe, things that actually exist here in our world that we can carbon date, that we can study, that we can theorize on, that we can connect to other cultures and religions. And he tries to take that and say, okay, what kind of picture does this build? What can we learn from this? What is this trying to tell us? You know, a lot of analysis, a lot of critical thinking. And some of the conclusions that he comes to in this series, I'm sure, and especially in this episode, do kind of go against what the kind of accepted narrative is of human history. So I think that's super interesting. I am into history. My boyfriend is a huge history nerd. He has done a lot of studying and a lot of research on, American history, world history, and he definitely goes beyond, like I said, the accepted narrative and is going more in depth, and we have conversations about this kind of stuff all the time. So when I was looking for something to study this week, this caught my eye. And this is episode 5, so I didn't even start at the beginning. I jumped straight to Gobekli Tepe because I recognized the name. I think, several years ago when this was first kind of brought to the public of like, hey, we've discovered this thing, this structure, this building, this, we're not sure what it is, but it predates Stonehenge, it predates the pyramids. So that's pretty significant because I think those are two of the oldest, before Gobekli, those were two of the oldest known structures, the pyramids and Stonehenge. And now we have this other thing that's coming up that's even older than that kind of gives us some more answers, but then also poses some more questions. So we're going to get into those questions and those answers soon here. But I just wanted to give a little more of my reasoning of why this was so interesting to me. In high school, I studied art history. I took a whole class dedicated to just art history and learned a lot of history as well as art through that. Surprise, surprise, learning art and history in an art history class. But the way that we would study these pieces in art history, and like we learned about Stonehenge and we learned about the pyramids. We didn't learn about Gobekli Tepe because I don't think it was part of the curriculum at that point. I don't think it was discovered and or published out into the public yet. But we would learn about all of these ancient, and we even went back to like ancient Mesopotamia and the Greeks and the Romans and all these old pieces of architecture and art that are thousands of years old that we, know very little about. And we would look at these things and try and look at what they are, how they were made, look at the context of where they are located and maybe what the people of that time, how they would have been living or what they would have been doing, and trying to kind of build out information and reasoning for this art and for this architecture based on the context in which it was created. And I enjoy doing that. I think it's, fascinating to kind of draw these conclusions and put things together almost like you're putting a puzzle together. Like you're taking all of these separate pieces and separate bits of information and bringing them onto one page and taking a step back and looking at it and saying, okay, what does this mean? What does this create? What is the larger picture here that we have put together? So that is kind of what Graham Hancock was doing in this episode about Gobekli Tepe. And I was really entertained and interested in what he had to say. So we're going to get into it. We're going to go through it. We're going to answer the following kind of questions, the classic questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. But we're going to go in a different order because we don't know who. We don't know who at all built this. So we're going to skip over that one for now and look at all of the other pieces of information, answer these other questions. And then from there, at the end of the episode, we'll do some thinking and theorizing about who might have built this. So there is one more thing I want to touch on before we get into the meat of this episode, and it is to put us in the right mindset to listen to this topic and be able to learn from it. So like I mentioned, the information about Gobekli Tepe and even all of Graham Hancock's work kind of goes against the modern accepted narrative of human history. And him presenting all of this is controversial, to say the least. And I think you know as well as I do that in this modern day, things that are controversial are not well accepted, are not well listened to, and there's a level of kind of emotional investment and defensiveness that can come in when we're talking about something controversial. So I want to kind of, before we even get into it, kind of nip that in the bud and get us in the right headspace to listen to these topics without getting emotional or defensive, just within our own minds, because it's really easy to do that and to kind of let that overtake you. And so I want everybody with me. Let's all take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, and kind of relax, let everything go. Relax our throats, relax our minds, relax the space between our ears, kind of wiggle your fingers a little bit. All right, and get into a headspace where you are ready and open to receive information without judgment and without having to take it in as fact. We're just kind of, right now, this is like exploratory. This is listening. This is, potential. We don't have to accept or believe everything that we have learned here today. But I just want us to be able to, take it and be able to think critically about it and not just dismiss it or push it away. Because a lot of the times when you are confronted with new information, either about yourself or about the world, ego can come in and kind of block you from being able to properly accept these things or think about these things. Ego says, I know. Ego says, I already know what's going on. I already know who you are. I know who I am. I know how this world works. And if you bring in something else that challenges the ego gets defensive, and the ego wants to sometimes push those things away and kind of demean the people who are saying them, or you kind of want to puff yourself up above this new information so that you don't feel less than, or you don't feel like there's something that you were missing or you were misinformed about. And so let's take a moment. I want you guys to take a look at your ego, see it sitting there listening to this with you, and it can be there, it can listen too, that's fine, but I want you to know that you are the one in control, and you don't have to let your ego take over you. You can tell it to sit down and behave, and you and your ego can, work on all of this together and accept the information without taking it in as part of your identity, okay? So now that we've done that, now that we're in the right headspace for this, we can jump in and start talking about Gobekli Tepe. And we're going to start off with what it is. So Gobekli Tepe is a large structure, a sophisticated megalithic, big words here, a sophisticated megalithic site. And I believe megalith just means a big structure or a big thing. Here is the official definition of megalith. A megalith is a large, often rough-hewn stone used in prehistoric monuments or structures. Okay, so that's definitely what we're going to be talking about today, megalithic structures. Again, I said before, this one specifically, Gobekli Tepe, is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge and the Giza pyramids. So think about how old Stonehenge and the Giza pyramids are, and then go back from that another 7,000 years. 7,000 years is such a long time. We're in the year 2024. And that's even just that was based on the death of Christ, the birth of Christ, 2024 AD, after death. So 2,000 years, feels like a long time. We've done a lot in 2,000 years. Think about 7,000 years, and that's older than something that's already thousands of years old. Okay, so this is crazy old, and again, it's survived, it's lasted until this day. It's lasted long enough for us to be looking at it and studying it and be able to gather information and draw conclusions. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I encourage you to go and look it up yourself, but I'm going to describe it anyways. So there are descending circular tiers of what looks like small, thin walkways made out of smaller stones that have been built like laid bricks, like one on top of the other, with intermittent large slabs kind of sticking out of the walls or standing on their own. These slabs are a blocky T shape, and they have both high and low relief carvings on them. High and low relief is kind of like art terms. High relief means it's sticking out of whatever wall or whatever material that it was carved out of. So think of like statues. Any kind of freestanding statue is a high relief statue. You can see all around it. It has a lot of dimension, a lot of depth to it, things like that. Low relief looks more like a drawing that is just kind of slightly sticking out of whatever it has been carved into. So it has a little bit of dimension. It has an outline. You can certainly see what has been created, but it is very much still attached to the wall or the stone or whatever piece of material that it was created or carved from. So these stones, these slabs have both on them. And they are decorated with images of animals, tons and tons of animals, different types. They're very stylized. They're very symbolic. Graham Hancock described them as like Noah's Ark inscribed into stone, which I think is interesting. And some of the stones, the larger ones, have hands carved into them as if someone was hugging the stone maybe, or as if to represent that the hands themselves are part of the stone or to belong to stone. I don't know exactly. So there in Gobekli Tepe, there were 4 separate circular enclosures that were all kind of built the same way. And they each had these 2 T-shaped megaliths at the center. So these were at the very center of these kind of enclosures are these free-standing T-shaped stones that were also carved, intricately carved, and each one weighs 10 tons. 10 tons. So now let's think about how much that actually weighs. Let's put that into context. Each ton is equivalent to 2,000 pounds. So that means that 10 tons is 20,000 pounds. That would, imagine 20,000 pounds being dropped onto anything. It would crush it in an instant. It would obliterate it into dust. On average, a car weighs around 4,000 pounds. Of course, that varies significantly, depending on the size and make and model, whatever. But just for our perspective here, 4,000 pounds, that's 2 tons. So this one stone weighs as much as 5 cars stacked on top of each other. And if you think about it, this stone, it's not the size of 10 cars stacked on top of each other, right? It's not stories into the air. It's maybe about like 10 or 12 feet tall. So all of that weight is just compressed, and the stone is so dense and it weighs so much that we don't know how these were lifted and set into place. This is the same as Stonehenge. We do not know how these things were built. All of our vast advancement of knowledge and technology and everything that we've been able to create today, these structures from thousands and thousands of years ago are outside of our scope of knowledge. They're outside of our current human understanding. Wild. Okay, so this is what they are. And these enclosures is actually not all of it. So let's talk about where. So Gobekli Tepe is located in Turkey on an isolated hilltop near the Syrian border. So obviously it was not Turkey and it was not Syria back when it was first built. So Gobekli Tepe dates back to 11,600 years ago. That's when it was built. It was built over the course of about 1,000 years. And okay, so looking back at that time, what was this land? What was it? What was it existed? So kind of the first, again, if we're looking at the accepted current narrative, sort of the first civilization was kind of established in the Fertile Crescent, which is sort of the modern day Middle East. So that includes like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. This region was known for its fertile land, and like I said, was one of the cradles of civilization where some of the earliest known human agricultural communities developed. So Gobekli Tepe was built back when the first human civilization was first being developed in this location of the Fertile Crescent. So at that point, the people living in that time would have been from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Sumerian cultures. And like we said, this was kind of the first place where humans left the hunter-gatherer lifestyle behind and started to put down roots and create civilization and establish farming and agriculture. And from there, that kind of built out into, what we are today. So I do want to acknowledge, just really quick, that starting with this like Fertile Crescent, ancient Mesopotamia, kind of ignores the rest of the continent of Africa that was, I believe, already like established and existed during this time. I remember learning about in school, we learned about like prehistoric civilizations, and we were looking at like African masks and stuff like that. That wasn't prehistoric. Those people existed there before the Fertile Crescent, before Mesopotamia. Africa was a rich and thriving continent, and it is huge. So again, talking about the accepted narrative of this is where human civilization started in Mesopotamia, I want to acknowledge that we may not know what kind of other civilizations already existed before that on that same continent of Africa. But for now, we're going to keep going with Gobekli Tepe. So there are 4 of these main constructures that have been uncovered in Gobekli Tepe, But they have also gone and done kind of like some underground radar and looked into the hill that it is built on and discovered that there's more that has been buried underneath the earth and in that hill. There are up to 20 other enclosures located inside the hill and over 200 pillars, 200 of these giant stone megalithic pillars that have been set and built that are beneath the earth that Gobekli Tepe sits on. There's more under there, and that stretches out larger than 12 soccer fields. That kind of building, that kind of architecture is crazy to think about because it's huge. That's huge. That's so much work. That's so much time. Again, that everything that we see of Gobekli Tepe was built over the course of, 1,000 years. It took 1,000 years for these people to build this. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of effort, a lot of energy. And again, we don't know how. We don't know how. Like these people were coming out of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and they just created these crazy large structures like right off the bat. That was their first priority. I don't know about that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later about, like why these people built them, what was the motivation behind it. Let's talk a little bit more about when Gobekli Tepe was created and kind of what else was going on around that time in history. So I think I said that this structure dates back 11,600 years. 11,600 years ago, they were building Gobekli Tepe. Now, what else was happening around that time? We're going to find out. So there was an event called the Younger Dryas. I think we would know it more colloquially as the Ice Age. So it was a huge cataclysmic event, geological upheaval. There were floods. All of the like ancient fauna went extinct. Things like saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and all of that went extinct in this Younger Dryas. Sea levels raised significantly. So this was obviously a very big event for, the world and the cultures and the people and the plants and animals that lived on it. And this happened around between like 13,000 and 12,000 years ago. It had a significant impacts on the Earth's climate, like we said, an ice age. So we the Earth cooled greatly, leading to the return of glacial conditions. Many have proposed that the Younger Dryas was triggered by some sort of cosmic impact event, like a comet or an asteroid collision with Earth, which caused widespread environmental changes. And then, like we said, the extinction of flora and fauna, especially the megafauna, the fossils and bones of which we find today. So this definitely happened. Now, again, it was 12,000 years ago. So exactly what happened and why and what caused it, we don't really know. These are mostly speculations, but I think the general consensus is that something did happen. Like that is accepted by, current modern historians and archaeologists as well. Something happened. So this ice age, this Younger Dryas, ended about 12,000 years ago. And Gobekli Tepe was built 11,600 years ago. So that's only 400 years after the end of a worldwide cataclysmic event. And I'm just gonna posit some ideas here about what these people's priorities were after going through thousands of years of an ice age, something that, changed the world forever, changed the earth forever, something that killed various species of plants and animals. I combined the two. Killed various species of plants and animals. And I'm sure lots of humans as well did not survive a global ice age. So it is very interesting to think that they would take the time to build these structures, to build Gobekli Tepe, as they're, I would imagine, just sort of like trying to get back on their feet, trying to find somewhere, that can actually support and sustain life, probably the Fertile Crescent. That, I think that would make sense. So they're in the Fertile Crescent, just trying to get back to normal life again, and figure out what that looks like in a world that is now completely changed from what it was before. So to take the time then to build a structure like this, it must have been super important. It must have a really significant meaning to these people, so much that they would make it a priority to build something like this. Now, what that meaning is, again, we don't know. At this point of the episode, at this point of the podcast, I think now we're kind of stepping away from the knowns of Gobekli Tepe, and we're going to be sort of adding our own thoughts and our own ideas to answer how, who, and why. In the episode itself, Graham Hancock proposes the idea that there is a piece of history that we are missing that speaks of and refers to and would be evidence of a lost, more advanced civilization. I think this comes mainly from the basis of that again, we today don't know how these things were created. We don't know how Gobekli Tepe was built. We don't know how Stonehenge was made. We don't know how the pyramids were built. We cannot replicate that today. I think, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, but this is today, 2024, would be the most advanced that the human race has ever been, right? With all of our technology, our cell phones, our cars, our planes, all of that, we would be, you would think the most advanced that we've ever been. We've gone the opposite direction into small things, and been able to break apart atoms, and we're even going into like the quantum realm and string theory, stuff like that. So we're advanced in terms of the small complexities of our world, but these large complexities we have no idea. And so kind of the main conclusion that you can come to from that is that these people who built Gobekli Tepe were more advanced than we are today. They knew more than we knew today about how to build these giant structures. So that is one thing, just, this idea of that there's something unknown out there that is yet to be discovered. So we cannot answer the question how Gobekli Tepe was built. If we knew who built it, we might be able to, come to a better idea or understanding of how. But we also don't know who built it. I mean, we could guess that the people of the time built it, of course, but there are some inconsistencies there as well. So in carbon dating all of this Gobekli Tepe, in looking at the history and the timelines of the world around it and what people were doing at that time, there was no evidence of farming and agriculture at Gobekli Tepe and in the area surrounding it. They were hunter-gatherers when Gobekli Tepe was built. So this kind of leads to the idea that this settlement came first, Gobekli Tepe came first, and then farming and agriculture was built out around it. And again, this contradicts the accepted narrative, which said that architecture and farming came first. And once that was developed and discovered, then people began to settle into one place and build civilization around it. This Gobekli Tepe kind of states the opposite, that this settlement came first, civilization came first, and from that civilization, then people started to farm and develop agriculture because they were now living in one place, so they could, grow their food in one place. They weren't hunter-gatherers, they weren't nomadic anymore. So that's interesting. That's something to consider. So this idea that civilization came first and then agriculture, at least in the view and the opinion of Graham Hancock, proposed that there was some sort of transfer of technology where there was a group of more advanced people who built this site, who built Gobekli Tepe. Either they built it themselves or they taught the humans who were there how to build it, or they, helped them and showed them and built it together. But basically, these people came, settled, built Gobekli Tepe, built a civilization, and then from there gathered the people of that area, of that realm, and taught them agriculture, taught them architecture, taught them agriculture, and kind of established these civilizations. And then we, as humans living on Earth, came to them and learned from them and continued with what they had taught us to build and develop and grow into where we are now today. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that so interesting to think that there might have been some other group of people of this advanced civilization that came and taught us the things that we know now today? The basics and the foundation for where we are today didn't come from us as humans, didn't come from our own development and intelligence, but was sort of handed and gifted to us by some other kind of people. I mean, it's wild. I feel like I'm not even, I don't know, like it's hard to even wrap my brain around it just because it's so different from everything that has previously been taught and established. But I do think that there is something, that there's some sort of truth here, even if that truth is that something happened and we don't know what it was. I think it would be arrogant for us to believe that what we have known and accepted for so long is completely true and completely fact, and that we would not even be open to something else that, again, explains what we don't know. Like if we can open up to the fact that maybe there was some other advanced group of people that built these structures and taught us the things that we know now today. That is a very simple answer to a lot of complex questions and a lot of things that are as of yet unexplained, right? Like that, there's some answer out there that can explain the things that are currently unexplained. And I think that it is worth it to be open to hearing about, these new ideas, to consider them. Again, like I said at the beginning, we don't have to take anything here as fact. This is more exploratory. But I do want us to keep in mind something that I heard when I was young, when I was a kid, and it kind of stuck with me. History was written by the winners. History is written by the winners. Whoever is now in power, they are the ones who get to say what happened in the past. And, sort of a more nuanced take on that is history is written with the bias of the people who are writing it. So, there's always two sides to every story. And a lot of the times when it comes to recent history, especially, and even old ancient history, whoever is the person, whoever is teaching this history and passing it down, they are going to be teaching it from their own bias. And sometimes that is an unconscious bias. Sometimes that is a very conscious bias. So I think it's important to understand that anything that you're learning, there's usually another side to it, especially when it is involving people and events and timelines and histories, and especially like motivations and intent and stuff like that. So history is written from the bias of the people that are writing it. And I just want us to keep that in mind on this topic and on future topics that we end up discussing. I mean, I guess to some degree, everything from here that I'm telling you about is coming from my own bias as well. I mean, I'm trying to be objective and I'm trying to communicate the information that was given in, this series, this information from Graham Hancock. But of course, like I already have sort of explored some of these ideas and possibilities, in my own private learning. And I want you guys to start to explore and consider these other possibilities as well. I don't want you to take everything that I'm saying as gospel, as law. Of course, I'm just one random girl on the internet, but I do want you to start to think about all of this from your own perspective and not just take the word of somebody else's perspective. Okay, so we're going to now talk about why. I think we talked about how and we talked about who. Again, we don't know how, we don't know who, we can only guess. But let's talk about why, because there are parts of Gobekli Tepe that can kind of give us some idea as to why this was built. And so we're going to talk about one of these specific stones, specific megaliths of Gobekli Tepe, and that is called Pillar 43. And in the episode, we talked to a man named Dr. Martin Sweatman, who I think has spent a lot of his time dedicated to studying Gobekli Tepe and what it means and what it is. And so he explained a specific pillar called the Vulture Stone. And this stone is covered in symbols and pictures, images of animals, carvings, and I believe that this stone also had the hands on it. Very interesting. So what does this mean? What might this mean? Obviously, it took these people time and effort to put these stones in place. It took them a lot of time and effort to create these carvings. Why would it have been so important to them to take the time to do this? So the symbols on this stone might represent constellations from the zodiac. I think that they had, like, one of the main ones that they were looking at was the crab or the scorpion, one of those two. And there were other animals, symbols carved around it. There was sort of a central circle that might represent a sun. And the specific way that these carvings were laid onto this stone exactly matches the constellations of the night sky. So you could look at these images, these drawings, carvings of these animals, and kind of make little pinpoints of where the important things are, where their joints are, where the head is, whatever, and take those pinpoints and map them directly onto the stars in the sky. And they were looking at some 3 carvings that were up on the top of the stone, showing these kind of half circles and other symbols. And I don't know much about astronomy, astrology, and how they connected this, how they came to this conclusion. So I'm just going to go ahead and trust that Martin Sweatman and Graham Hancock know what they're talking about, and that all of this, that they're saying about how the stars line up and how the carvings line up, we're going to go ahead and say that that's correct. And if that is correct, then the specific imagery on this stone would represent a date. It'd give us a date in time. And based on our knowledge of the movement of the stars in the sky and where certain stars would be placed in different, seasons of the year where the sun sits on the horizon in different times of the year. They were able to determine that this stone represents some point in time around 100-year window, about between 11,000 and 12,000 years ago. And if you recall from our earlier discussions about the timeline, that would have been the end of the Younger Dryas before the construction of Gobekli Tepe. So I'll say again, this stone is representing a date in time that is after the end of the Ice Age, before Gobekli Tepe started. So, somewhere within that 400 years, there was a date that was important enough to be put into stone. A date, an event, something happened that was important enough that it was a priority for these people to commemorate that date in stone, in a giant megalithic 10-ton piece of rock that was going to last for thousands and thousands of years. That is significant. That means that something significant happened, that they wanted to memorialize it for time eternal. And I think that is a very human thing to do, because if you look at us now, we do the same thing. We memorialize important events, important people. We put them into stone. We literally carved the faces of 4 presidents into a cliff. I'm thinking of also like the Lincoln Memorial. He was a very important person. He represented a very important time in the accepted narrative of human history. They made a huge statue of him that now sits untouched, respected in Washington, D.C. I'm even thinking of like 9/11. There's a huge, beautiful memorial for the event of 9/11 and all the people who lost their lives in that tragedy. Something that, exists to remind us and to remind future generations of something that happened at that time and at that date. So I can only imagine that these people, thousands and thousands of years ago, were probably doing the same thing. So they were memorializing something important that happened. And now this is just me. This is just my conclusion. This is what I am drawing from this. They are memorializing a date and time that happened after the end of the Ice Age and before the construction of Gobekli Tepe. So maybe they are memorializing the date and time that this ancient race or ancient civilization of advanced people came to Earth, the Fertile Crescent, to wherever these people were living at that time. Because again, the humans, the hunter-gatherers of this time would not have known how to build Gobekli Tepe. So it would have been built by these people would have already been there, helping them, teaching them, transferring this knowledge and technology. I'm sure that they would have felt, a large amount of reverence and respect and gratitude to these people who were gifting them with such expansive knowledge and information, that they probably would have wanted to show that by memorializing this ancient group of advanced people with a construction, a megalithic site, carving that date and time of their arrival into stone. I mean, that, the logic of that makes sense to me. Again, whether or not that actually happened, of course, we don't know, but the logic of that timeline and, like we said before, the context of the world that these people were living in and their intention behind it, all of that makes sense to me. All right, so there is one more thing that I want to touch on before we wrap up here, and I want to look at some of the myths and some of the lore of ancient Mesopotamia, of the people of this time, and even of other religions from around the world. and look at what they say in their myth and kind of connect that to now what we have learned from research from today. So all of the some of the facts that we've already talked about and some of the theories that we have put forth from these facts, and then now let's look at the religion and see what overlaps, see what connects, see what the people of this time believed and what has been passed down from them, and see if that can, maybe give us some more context or sort of explain, some of these mysteries that we're looking at now today. Okay, so from the Mesopotamian lore, there was this idea that the gods created the earth, the gods created the plants, the animals, and they created humans to be stewards of the earth, to take care of it, to help it thrive, to help it flourish. And there was sort of a first round, a first draft, if you will, of humans that really were not doing their jobs very well and were, kind of messing things up and maybe living in sin to some degree. They were not taking care of the earth in the way that the gods had intended them to. So rather than, putting any effort into fixing the humans of the time, they said, well, let's just start over. I think that these people are a little too far gone. It's not worth the effort. Let's kind of wipe the slate clean, start over with another round of humanity, and hopefully we'll do it a little better this time. So in this Mesopotamian lore, the gods sent a great flood to wipe out the first round of humanity. Now, this great flood myth exists in several other religions and cultural traditions. A well-known example is the biblical story of Noah's Ark, which shows up in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But there's also the Hindu myth of Manu and the Matsya avatar. This is just from some basic research. I don't know too much about that in depth. But these flood myths typically recount a catastrophic deluge of water sent by the gods to cleanse the earth or to punish humanity. Looking at the actual course of known and recorded history, I think that this might be the Ice Age. That the Ice Age that we know happened and these great floods that are depicted in lore and in religion might be one and the same. So here in the specific Mesopotamian lore, the people who would have, created Gobekli Tepe, they say that after this great flood, 7 sages came to then now sort of guide, the next version of this earth and to teach humanity how to actually be the good stewards of the earth. So there was a sage, I suppose, named Apkallu, who taught them skills of civilization, which would kind of align with the idea of civilization coming first before agriculture. So he taught them civilization, I'm sure would have taught them, how to build structures, how to build buildings, how to build these, temples and stone sites, and then from there would have taught them farming, bringing them out of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They also speak of another sage named Owanis, who came from the sea to teach civilization to humanity. And again, there's other religions from this time, from other places around the world, who kind of have the same sort of kind of themes and same sort of deific figures that came and brought similar things. So, for example, there's the Greek myth of Poseidon, who was the god of the sea. He was associated with wisdom and the founding of cities, i.e. the building of civilization. There was also the Maori legend of Maui, who was a demigod who brought knowledge and fire to humankind. And he was also a god or a demigod, I suppose, who came from the sea. So these kind of myths serve as, very intriguing cultural narratives that sort of hint at the possibility of these ancient figures who are all in some way connected to all of these different civilizations. Like think about it for a second. How could, if all of these separate civilizations and cultures of people developed without any connection to each other, how would they have all developed sort of the same kinds of myths and stories about their own history and how their world and life and civilization came to be? Why do all of these assumed separate stories line up and all kind of say the same thing? Either these people did have some way to talk to each other, and all of these, kind of global myths and religions were created collaboratively between these separate groups of people, or there is a ton of truth here, and the same set of people, these sages or these Greek gods or these coastal island demigods, maybe these are all the same people, the same one group of people came to land by way of the sea in all these different places and taught these people the same thing. And just now, thousands and thousands of years later, as we're uncovering these ancient structures, ancient art, ancient texts, we can now start to piece it together. But all of this stuff, all of this information has been lost, of course, over thousands and thousands of years. And now in our advanced state of civilization 2024, we have the ability to look back on the past and start to make these connections. It's truly fascinating. I really hope that you guys are as sort of blown away by all of this as I am, because there's a ton of evidence, at least from what I've seen, just a ton of evidence that there is some ancient global connection between civilizations from all around the world that, again, we of today are just beginning to uncover, just beginning to even know that there are these questions to ask and know that there is something unexplained, unanswered that we can, dive into and delve into more. And there was a quote that came out of this episode from Graham Hancock that kind of stuck with me. Very simple. He said, we need to trust the myths. We need to trust the myths. Now, what does this mean? To me, this follows the idea that, and this is, again, a very simple thought, but there's nothing new under the sun. There was nothing new under the sun. We hear about this when it comes to like media, TV shows, movies. There's nothing original anymore. All we're seeing is the same stories being retold, either with a different spin or from a different perspective or whatnot, but that there is nothing new, nothing original under the sun. I think that there is some truth to that, in that these myths did not just come out of nowhere. All of these myths, all of these, different gods and stories from these different religions, people didn't just make them up out of nowhere. They were based on something. They were based on something that was true and real, especially for the people who were living in that time, who existed in that time, and who were experiencing it and passing down these legends and these stories. There is something true that these are based on. And of course, we can't know exactly what that is. We're trying to find these windows into the past. We're trying to piece together what happened and what it was, just from carvings on an ancient stone, from stories, from oral traditions that, may have been warped and changed over time, but they came from somewhere. They came from something. There was something true and real that inspired all of these stories, which means that there is something that was true and real, some ancient global truth, ancient global through line that caused these ancient people to, again, document, put into stone these stories and these informations and these times and dates, something true that caused people to memorialize it and to develop actual like religions and traditions and vast, rich cultural tapestries that have survived, again, to this day. So all of this to say that there is something out there that happened, something out there that we truly, don't know exactly. We have no way to know exactly. But I think that there's enough evidence that shows, that at least proves to us that there are questions unanswered. We cannot think that we know everything. We cannot completely trust what has come before, because as our own technology and intelligence and knowledge base advances and grows, then we can now take these new strategies and these new methods of gathering information and turn them back on the past and try and find something new, try and discover something else. Ego and arrogance says, I know what it is, I have all the facts, I'm right. But to set that aside and to be able to say and understand and acknowledge and accept, I don't know everything, I don't know what it is, I am not always right, and I am open to new ideas, and I am open to learning new things. That's important. It's important to be able to do that. And you can hear new ideas, and you can listen to, someone else's fact or opinion and be able to accept it and think about it critically and even have a conversation about it without becoming offended by it, without being emotionally attached to your own thoughts and ideas. And I think that that's sort of a lost art nowadays, with cancel culture, with outrage culture, with rage baiting, with all of these lines drawn between people of different races and different cultures. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to, as a society, accept and be open to new ideas and to different ideas and to ideas that challenge known beliefs. But it is so important to be able to challenge known beliefs, because that is how you learn, and that's how you grow, and that's how you improve upon what has come before. Okay, I know that got a little long-winded at the end there, but thank you guys for listening to this. This was super fun, super interesting to kind of put all of this information together. I really hope you learned something. Or if you didn't learn anything, I hope you at least heard something new. I hope you at least heard something that you had never heard of before, and that you will maybe, take whatever you have heard and learned today and, kind of take a couple of moments over the next week to consider it and to think about it and to think about what you want to sort of bring into your own view of the world as truth. Or maybe even there's more questions that you have now that you can go and research and look into. But I had a lot of fun, learning about all of this. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, a wonderful week ahead of you. As always, please go leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And I'll give you guys a shout out. Any new reviews, I'll give you guys a shout out at the end of next week's episode. You can also find us on Instagram at SmartyPantsPod. I always post a feed post on whatever episode we are covering that week. Whatever topic we're covering that week. So in the comments, go find me there in the comments. Tell me what you thought about all of this. Tell me what you learned. I'll be responding to comments there. You can also find Operation Smarty Pants on YouTube. We have a channel. I do post every single episode just as a YouTube video. It's just it's audio only. There's no visual, there's no imagery of it. But you can also support there. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. But yeah, I'm super grateful for everyone who is here listening in these early episodes. I'm having so much fun putting all of this together. And I hope you stick around for the long haul. Like I said at the top, we are on a mission to acquire knowledge and expand our minds. And there is absolutely no limit to what we can accomplish with that. So once again, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one. Ciao. All right, guys, it's time for shout outs. We've got 2 today. First one comes from Apple Podcasts. Awesomeness13256437 says, whether you're a seasoned podcast listener or just breaking the ice, this is a great addition to your library of shows. Super fun and informative, which makes it great for a quick and casual listen. Thank you, Awesomeness, for the 5-star review. I'm glad that you are enjoying the podcast. I really appreciate it. Second shout out comes from Spotify. A man named Ricky, responded to the Q&A and said, great first episode, Ray. He definitely got into the doc through my eyes. Looking forward to your next dive. Well, Ricky, the next dive will be coming out next week. Make sure to stay tuned, and I will see all of you then.